"Get out of here, you old woman!" My son-in-law shouted that I was worthless and kicked me out of the house, but the police showed up the very next day. My name is Margaret Anderson. I'm 68 years old, and I'm the mother of Sarah, who's 42. And for you to better understand this real story, I'm going to tell you how it all began. You know that moment when you feel the ground disappear from under your feet? Well, that's exactly how I felt when I heard those words coming out of my son-in-law's mouth. "Get out of here, you old woman!" He screamed with so much rage, with so much contempt, that it seemed like every letter of that phrase was loaded with years of accumulated resentment. My ungrateful daughter was standing right there beside him, arms crossed, that cold look I already knew so well. She didn't say anything, but her silence was even crueler than his screams. Right there, in that instant, I understood that it wasn't just about kicking me out of a house. It was about stripping away any trace of dignity I still carried. My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't shed a single one in front of them. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. While he kept screaming, my mind started traveling back in time as if I was watching a movie of my own life. I remembered when my daughter was little, that sweet girl who used to hug me tight and say she loved me. Where did that girl get lost? When did she transform into this ungrateful daughter who now watched silently while her husband treated me like trash? Memories came flooding. The times I helped with money I barely had. The weekends I spent taking care of the grandkids while they went out to have fun. The sleepless nights when someone got sick. Each memory was a stab wound, because I realized that none of it mattered. Absolutely nothing. The total humiliation of that moment wasn't just in the words he used. It was in the fact that I, an elderly mother who dedicated her entire life to family, was being thrown out like I was old furniture that didn't serve a purpose anymore. I started gathering my things in a rush, my hands trembling so much I could barely hold my purse. Each object I picked up seemed to weigh a ton, not because of its physical weight, but because of the emotional weight of being expelled from the only house where I had a roof over my head. They didn't even bother to help me. They just stood there, watching me as if I were a stranger invading their property. That wasn't fair, but life rarely is, right? "You've got 10 minutes, he yelled again, this time pounding his fist on the table so hard the glasses shook. 10 minutes to erase years of life under that roof. 10 minutes to carry everything I had left of my belongings. 10 minutes to exit their lives as if I had never existed. I looked at my daughter, searching in her eyes for some sign of the girl I raised. But all I saw was a stranger, a woman who chose her husband's side without questioning, who decided that her elderly mother didn't deserve even a drop of respect. This real story was happening right before my eyes, and I could barely process it. How did we get to this point? As I ran up the stairs to grab more clothes, I heard his laughter echoing through the house. That gold-digger son-in-law was satisfied. That was obvious. He always wanted to get rid of me, always treated me like a nuisance, a thorn in his side that got in the way of his plans. And now he was succeeding. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was going to explode inside my chest. I grabbed an old suitcase from the closet and started throwing clothes inside without even folding them properly. I didn't have time for organization, didn't have time to think. I just wanted to get out of there before the situation got even worse. But deep down, a part of me refused to believe this was really happening. I came down the stairs with the heavy suitcase banging on each step, making a dull sound that seemed to scream my defeat. When I got to the living room, they were sitting on the couch, watching television as if nothing was happening, as if they hadn't just destroyed a mother's heart. This emotional story I was living wasn't one of those with happy endings in movies, at least not in that moment. I passed by them in silence, pulling my suitcase with difficulty, feeling every muscle in my body ache with the effort. Neither of them got up to help. Neither of them even looked in my direction. It was as if I had already ceased to exist for them. The front door was open, and the cold night wind came in as if it was pushing me out. I stopped for a second on the threshold, looking back one last time. That house had been my refuge in recent years, the place where I thought I could age with dignity alongside my family. But dignity is something they decided I didn't deserve to have. I saw photos on the wall. Mine, my daughter's when she was a child, the grandchildren's. It was like looking at ghosts from a time that no longer existed. My throat tightened, but I swallowed the tears. I wasn't going to cry. Not now. Not in front of them. "And don't come back," were the last words I heard before the door slammed behind me. The sound echoed in the silent night like a gunshot. There, standing on the sidewalk with my suitcase at my feet and my purse hanging on my shoulder, I felt the weight of all that humiliation fall on me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The sky was dark, without stars, as if even the universe had decided to turn its back on me. I looked around, trying to decide where to go. I didn't have many options. I didn't have many places. But I had something they didn't know about. I had courage, and that courage, in that moment, was all I had left. I started walking down the street, dragging my suitcase along the uneven sidewalks. Each step was a struggle, not just from physical exhaustion, but from the emotional weight of being treated that way by people who were supposed to love me. This ungrateful daughter I raised with so much care had just kicked me out as if I were nothing. And that gold-digger son-in-law had finally gotten what he wanted, to see me far away, out of his way. Cars passed on the street, people going about their normal lives with no idea of the drama that was happening right there. It's funny how the world keeps spinning even when yours is falling apart, isn't it? Life doesn't stop for anyone's pain. I found a park bench a few blocks ahead and sat down, exhausted. My legs were shaking, and it wasn't just from tiredness. It was from everything: fear, anger, sadness, disbelief. I put the suitcase beside me and let my head fall into my hands. That's when the tears finally came. I cried silently, alone in that dark park, feeling the cold of the night penetrate to my bones. I thought about everything I had endured in silence for years, all the times I swallowed disrespect, all the cruel jokes disguised as teasing. That expulsion hadn't started that night. It had been built brick by brick over months, maybe years, and I had let it happen. But you know what's interesting about hitting rock bottom? You finally find something solid to lean on. And on that cold bench, with my entire life fitting into an old suitcase, I made a decision. This wasn't going to stay like this. I wasn't just going to accept being discarded as if my life had no value. This emotional story was far from over. Actually, it was just beginning. I wiped the tears with the back of my hand and took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs and, in some strange way, gave me clarity. I had to think. I had to act. Because one thing was certain. They might have gotten me out of their house, but they weren't going to take away my dignity. I grabbed my old cell phone and started thinking about who could help me in that moment. I had a friend, an acquaintance from the church group, who might be able to give me shelter for a night. But before calling her, something crossed my mind. A memory, an important detail they might have forgotten in their rush to kick me out. My name was on some documents for that house. I had contributed financially when they bought it. I had proof, receipts I had saved, and more importantly, I had rights. As I dialed my friend's number, a thought grew inside me like a small flame. They thought they had won, but the game was far from over, and I, an underestimated elderly mother, was about to show that I still had the strength to fight. You know when you walk into a place and feel like you're not welcome? That feeling that your every breath bothers someone? Well, that's exactly how I felt in that house from day one. I lived there, yes, my things were there, my bed was there, but I never truly belonged. It was like being a stranger in your own family, an invader tolerated only because they had no way to send me away. Until that night, of course. Ever since my daughter got married to that man, everything changed. The attentive girl I knew was gradually transforming, and I was becoming a burden, a problem to be solved. That house was never a home to me. It was just a roof, cold and hostile. In the first few months living with them, I noticed the signs. Small comments that seemed innocent, but carried poison disguised as concern. "Mom, don't you think you're eating too much?" Or, "Do you really need to spend so much time in the shower?" Each sentence was a calculated jab designed to make me feel guilty for simply existing there. My gold-digger son-in-law had an impressive ability to turn anything I did into a reason for criticism. If I cooked, I was making a mess of his kitchen. If I didn't cook, I was being lazy. There was no way to win in that game, because the rules changed according to his convenience. And my daughter? She just watched silently, always agreeing with him. The looks were the worst of everything. Have you ever noticed how a look can say more than 1,000 words? Well, the looks I received daily were of pure disdain, as if my presence contaminated the environment. When I entered the living room, conversation stopped. When I sat at the table, the mood became heavy, tense, as if everyone was counting the minutes until I finished and left. This real story I was living seemed like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I tried to make myself invisible, occupy the smallest space possible, make the minimum amount of noise. But nothing was enough. For them, my simple existence was already too much. Over time, things got worse in such a gradual way that I almost didn't notice. It's like that story about the frog in boiling water. The temperature rises slowly, and when you realize it, you're already burning. The hints became direct comments. The looks became words. "You could help more around the house" was a euphemism for "you're useless." I started doing absolutely everything they asked, hoping to earn a minimum of respect or gratitude. I washed, ironed, cooked, took care of the grandchildren, cleaned the entire house. But you know what I got in return? More demands, more criticism, more feeling that I would never be enough for that ungrateful daughter and her husband. Meals were a particular torture. We'd sit at the table and the silence was deafening. They talked to each other, laughed, made plans, and I was treated like a piece of furniture, present but irrelevant. When I tried to participate in the conversation, I was ignored or received short, rude responses that made it clear my opinion didn't matter. "Mom, you don't understand these things," was my daughter's favorite phrase whenever I tried to give advice or share an experience. As if my years of life were worth nothing, as if I hadn't raised her alone after her father left us. This emotional story of disrespect was being built meal after meal, day after day. There was a time when I heard them talking in the bedroom about me. The door was ajar, and I was passing through the hallway when I heard my daughter say, "I can't stand her here anymore, but what are we going to do?" And his response was even worse. "She has nowhere to go, so we have to put up with it. For now." Those words froze me right there in the hallway. It wasn't just about not wanting my presence. It was about tolerating me as an inevitable burden, counting the days until they found a way to get rid of me. I went back to my room in silence, sat on the bed and just stared at the wall. Did I deserve that? Had I been such a bad mother? Sundays were especially painful. They'd have friends over, have barbecues, fill the house with laughter and music. And me? I stayed locked in my room, listening to life happening out there without me. Nobody invited me to participate. Nobody knocked on my door to ask if I wanted to eat something. It was as if I didn't exist. An elderly mother forgotten inside her own family's house. Sometimes I'd risk coming out to get water or go to the bathroom, and I'd feel all eyes on me. Looks that clearly said, "What are you doing here?" I'd run back to my room, humiliated, feeling that total humiliation that only those who live through it can truly understand. But what hurt most wasn't the yelling or direct insults, because those, at least, you can react to. What hurt most was the silent contempt, that cruel way of making you feel small without needing to raise your voice. It was the way my gold-digger son-in-law sighed loudly whenever I entered a room, as if my presence was an unbearable nuisance. It was how my daughter looked away whenever I tried to talk to her, as if she didn't want to see me. It was the birthday presents that never came, the special dates that passed by unnoticed, the good mornings that were never answered. Each small gesture of indifference was a drop of water filling a bucket that, I didn't know yet, was about to overflow. I started feeling guilty about absurd things. Guilty for breathing, for taking up space, for existing. I'd apologize for things that weren't even my fault, just to avoid conflicts. Sorry for using the bathroom for too long. Sorry for leaving a glass in the sink. Sorry for being alive. That's basically what I was saying, even if not with those exact words. And you know what's worse? They never said it was okay. They just accepted my apologies as if they were deserved, as if I really was guilty of everything. That was consuming me from the inside, gradually erasing who I was. The strong woman who raised a daughter alone was becoming a frightened shadow. There was a day when I tried to talk to my daughter about how I was feeling. I waited for her to get home from work, made coffee the way she liked it, and asked to talk alone. "Daughter, I feel like I'm not welcome here," I began, my voice shaking. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Mom, don't exaggerate. You have a roof, food, everything you need. What more do you want?" What more did I want? Respect, dignity, to be treated like a mother, not like an unpaid maid. But I didn't say any of that. I just shook my head and left the room, feeling that familiar pain in my chest, the pain of not being seen, of not being heard, of not mattering to the only family I had. The weeks went by, and the tension only increased. Anything was a reason for a sarcastic comment, a look of disapproval, an argument. I walked on eggshells inside that house, literally, trying not to make noise so as not to bother them. I stopped watching television in the living room because they always changed the channel without asking. I stopped cooking because there was always something wrong with the food I made. I stopped trying, basically. I turned into a ghost, passing through the hallways without being noticed, living a life that wasn't really life. And even so, even completely erasing myself, it wasn't enough. The hostility kept growing, like a poisonous plant taking over everything. Then came the day when I realized this was no longer just disrespect disguised as difficult coexistence. It was intentional cruelty. It was psychological abuse. It was a systematic attempt to break me, to make me feel so small that I would decide to leave on my own. But where would I go? I didn't have enough money to rent a place. I didn't have other close relatives. My friends were too old to shelter me permanently. I was trapped in that situation, and they knew it. And the more they realized I had no way out, the more they felt entitled to treat me badly. This ungrateful daughter, who once swore to protect me, was now my tormentor. And I didn't know how much longer I could endure all of that before breaking completely. You know when you feel something's about to explode, but you don't know exactly when? That was the feeling hanging in the air in that house in the days leading up to my expulsion. The tension was so thick you could almost touch it, feel its weight on your shoulders every second. When someone loses respect, they lose control. And that's exactly what happened that afternoon that changed everything. I was in the kitchen, washing the lunch dishes, trying to be useful as always, when I heard heavy footsteps approaching. My gold digger son-in-law came in with that expression I already knew well, that mixture of anger and contempt that made my stomach turn. I knew a storm was coming. "You're still here?" he began, with that sarcastic tone he used whenever he wanted to put me down. It wasn't a real question, it was a provocation. I kept washing the dishes, trying to ignore him, trying not to fuel the conflict. But he wasn't interested in being ignored. He stepped forward and slammed his hand on the sink, making the plates tremble. "I'm talking to you! Or did you go deaf as well as old?" The words came out like spit, each syllable loaded with venom. My ungrateful daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway, but instead of defending me, she just crossed her arms and stood there, watching, waiting, as if this was a show she was the audience for. I took a deep breath and turned to face him. "I'm just washing the dishes," I replied, keeping my voice as calm as possible. But calm was the last thing he wanted. He wanted a reaction, wanted an excuse to explode. "Washing the dishes?" He laughed, but there was nothing funny about that laugh. "You make more mess than you clean. This house was better before you showed up." Each word was a stab, but the worst was yet to come. He moved closer, invading my personal space, using his height to intimidate me. "You know what I think? I think you're here as a favor. I think you should be grateful every day that we took pity on an elderly mother with nowhere to go." The total humiliation of that moment wasn't just in the words, but in the way he said them, with pleasure, savoring each insult as if it were a personal victory. I felt my hands trembling, but I kept my fists clenched at my sides. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I contributed to this house," I replied, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. "I helped financially when you bought it. I took care of your children. I did everything you asked." He laughed again, that cruel laugh that echoed in the kitchen. "Contributed? You gave a pittance. And as for my children, you think you're doing us a favor? You're a free babysitter, that's all, and you're not even good at that." That's when my daughter finally opened her mouth. And you know what she said? "He's right, Mom. You have no right to anything here." The words from my own daughter hurt more than anything he could say. It was like taking a punch to the stomach, losing all the air from your lungs at once. This real story was unfolding like a nightmare, and I was trapped in it, not knowing how to wake up. I looked at her, searching for some sign of the girl I knew, but all I saw was a stranger, a woman who had consciously chosen to side with a cruel man against her own mother. How did we get to that point? "Right?" I managed to say, my voice now trembling. "I'm your mother. I raised you alone, sacrificed for you my whole life." She looked away, but didn't back down. "And I'm grateful for that, Mom. But that doesn't give you the right to live here forever. This is our house, not yours." The gold digger son-in-law smiled, satisfied with his wife's support. It was exactly what he wanted, to turn my daughter against me, make her see her own mother as a problem to be solved, and he had succeeded perfectly. I felt something breaking inside me in that moment, not just my heart, but also the hope that things could get better. You know what's going to happen? He continued, moving even closer. You're going to leave here. I don't know when, I don't know how, but you're not staying in our house forever. You can be sure of that. It was no longer just humiliation. It was a clear threat, a promise that my days there were numbered, and by his expression, numbered in days, not months. You can't just kick me out like that, I tried to argue, but my voice came out weak without conviction, because deep down I knew he could. They were stronger, younger, had control. And me? I was just an elderly mother without resources, without support, without anyone. Can't I? He laughed again. Just watch. That's when he started listing all the ways I was a burden. How I used water, electricity, food, how I took up space, how I was dead weight in their lives. Each accusation was more absurd than the last, but he didn't care about the truth. He only cared about making me feel small, insignificant, disposable. And it was working. I felt my legs weaken, and I had to lean on the sink to keep from falling. This emotional story of cruelty was happening right there, in the kitchen where I had prepared so many meals for that ungrateful family. My daughter remained silent throughout his verbal attack. She didn't defend me, didn't ask for calm, didn't say anything. She just stood there, allowing it to happen. And in a way, her silence was worse than his screams. Because when you're attacked by a stranger, it still hurts. But when your own daughter stands there watching your destruction without doing anything, the pain reaches a completely different level. It's the pain of betrayal, of abandonment, of realizing you're completely alone, even when surrounded by family. I had nowhere to run, no one to defend me. It was me against the two of them. And another thing, he added, his voice lowering to a threatening tone, be careful what you do, what you say, because if you try to create problems, you'll regret it. This was no longer a domestic argument. It was pure intimidation. It was abuse. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten to this point? How had I allowed my life to reach a place where I was being threatened in the very house where I lived? But the truth is, I hadn't allowed anything. I had been led there gradually, day after day of disrespect and humiliation, until I woke up finding myself in that impossible situation. After that day, the house became even more unbearable. It was no longer just passive hostility, it was active aggression. They made a point of reminding me at every opportunity that I wasn't welcome, that I was there as a favor, that I could be kicked out at any moment. I started sleeping with the door locked, afraid of what might happen. I walked through the house as if I was walking on eggshells, trying not to give them any reason to finally do what they'd been threatening. This ungrateful daughter I had raised now looked at me as if I were an intruder. And the worst part was that I had started to believe it too. And in that moment, while I was alone in my room that night, my heart still racing from the argument, something changed inside me. It was no longer just fear or sadness. It was a cold, hard clarity. I understood that I needed to act, because if I didn't do something, if I didn't take some action to protect myself, that situation was only going to get worse. They had crossed every line, and I could no longer pretend everything was okay, that this was just a difficult phase. It was abuse, it was threat, and if I didn't do something about it, the consequences could be even worse. And that's when I started planning my exit, or rather, my survival. There's a type of silence that only those who've been kicked out know. It's a silence that screams, that weighs, that suffocates. And it was exactly that silence that accompanied me as I walked down the street that cold night, dragging my old suitcase and carrying all the shame in the world on my shoulders. Each step seemed to echo on the empty sidewalk, as if even my own footsteps were judging me. How did I get to that point? How did an elderly mother who dedicated her entire life to family end up being thrown out like garbage? The questions spun in my head non-stop, but the answers seemed too far away, lost somewhere between the past and present. All I knew was that I was alone, without direction, without shelter. When I finally managed to call my friend Martha from the church group, my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped my phone. Her voice on the other end of the line was like a glass of water in the desert. "Where are you?" Stay there. I'm coming to get you now. She didn't even ask questions, didn't request explanations. She just said she was coming. I sat on that park bench, hugging my suitcase as if it were the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling around me. The cold of the night penetrated to my bones, but it was nothing compared to the cold I felt inside. This real story of rejection and abandonment seemed too surreal to be true, but there I was, living every painful second of it. Martha arrived in 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. When I saw her car stopping in front of the park, the tears came back with full force. She got out quickly, hugged me tight, and didn't say anything. She just held me while I cried. Sometimes words aren't necessary. Sometimes a hug says everything that needs to be said. She grabbed my suitcase, helped me into the car, and only then asked, "What happened?" Between sobs, I told her everything. The expulsion, the screams, the total humiliation of being treated like nothing by my own daughter and gold-digger son-in-law. Martha listened in silence, her jaw tense, her eyes shining with contained anger. And when I finished, she said something that changed everything. "My brother is going to want to know about this." "Your brother?" I asked, confused. Martha nodded while driving through the dark streets. "He's a police officer. He's living with me now. When he finds out what they did to you, he's going to want to help. You can be sure of that." Something in the way she said that gave me a small spark of hope. A police officer, someone who understood laws, rights, how to deal with situations like that. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Martha kept driving in silence, giving me time to process everything, to breathe, to start understanding that maybe there was a way out of that impossible situation. For the first time that horrible night, I felt something beyond despair. When we arrived at Martha's house, the lights were on. She helped me get out with the suitcase and took me inside. The house was cozy, smelled like fresh coffee, and had that feeling of home that I hadn't felt in years. And that's when I saw him. A man was in the living room, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking about my age, graying hair at the temples, some wrinkles around the eyes. There was something familiar about him, but my mind was so confused I couldn't process it. When our eyes met, I saw his eyes widen in recognition. "Margaret?" he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. That's when it hit me like lightning. That face, those eyes, I knew him. "Robert?" I whispered, barely able to believe it. It had been so long, so many years since the last time we saw each other. Martha looked from one to the other, completely confused. "Wait, you two know each other?" Robert took a step forward, still processing the surprise of seeing me there. "We were friends in college," he explained to his sister, without taking his eyes off me. "We studied together, spent hours in the library. Margaret, I can't believe it's you. After all these years." I nodded, tears coming back, but now for a different reason. Of all the people in the world, of all the possible coincidences, it was him. The Robert I knew when we were young, full of dreams and plans for the future. And there I was, reuniting with him in the worst possible circumstances of my life. Martha was speechless. "Guys, I didn't know you knew each other. What an incredible coincidence." She shook her head, clearly surprised by the discovery. Robert approached me carefully, as if dealing with someone fragile, and maybe I was. "Martha told me on the way that something happened to you today. Tell me what it was, Margaret." There was genuine concern in his voice, a natural authority that made you want to trust, want to talk. We sat in the living room, and for the second time that night, I told the whole story. The threats, the screams, the violent expulsion. Robert listened attentively, asking specific questions, mentally noting details. This emotional story was finally reaching the ears of someone who could actually do something. "This is psychological abuse and illegal eviction," he said firmly when I finished. "Especially if you contributed financially to that house. Do you have documents that prove it?" I nodded, remembering the receipts I had saved over the years. "I have everything saved. Bank transfers, receipts, everything." Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Margaret, what they did isn't just morally wrong. It's illegal. And as a police officer, I can tell you that you have rights. We're going to do this the right way." There was determination in his voice, and for the first time since I was kicked out, I felt that maybe there was justice in this world, that maybe that ungrateful daughter and gold-digger son-in-law wouldn't get away with it. Martha brought tea for all of us, still processing the coincidence that her church friend and her brother knew each other from college. "The world really is small," she commented, shaking her head with a half smile. We sat talking late into the night. Robert explained the next steps, filing a formal report at the police station, gathering all the evidence, possibly getting a protection order. "You're not going through this alone," he assured. And there was something in the way he looked at me that went beyond professional solidarity. It was personal, as if he genuinely cared. "First you need to rest," Martha intervened, touching my shoulder gently. "The guest room is ready. Tomorrow we deal with all of this. For now, you're safe here." Safe. I hadn't heard that word applied to me in so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like. That night, lying in the comfortable bed of the guest room, I looked at the ceiling in the dark and tried to process everything that had happened. In a few hours, my life had been turned upside down. I had been kicked out, humiliated, rejected by my own daughter. But I had also found support where I least expected it. Martha, who took me in without hesitation, and Robert, that friend from the past who appeared at the exact moment I needed it most. The coincidence was so impressive it almost seemed like destiny. This elderly mother who had felt completely lost a few hours ago now had a plan, had allies, had hope. It wasn't the kind of naive hope that everything would magically resolve itself. It was something more solid, more real. I thought about everything I had swallowed in silence over the years, each insult disguised as a joke, each cruel comment masked as concern, each look of contempt I had pretended not to see. I had spent so much time trying to keep the peace, trying to be the understanding mother, that I had forgotten to fight for my own rights, for my own dignity. But that night, something had changed inside me. It was no longer just about surviving. It was about reclaiming my worth, my humanity. They had kicked me out thinking they were getting rid of a problem. They had no idea what was coming. I grabbed my phone and reread the old messages my daughter used to send me before everything got worse. "I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything. You're the best." When did those words turn into, "You have no right to anything here"? When did love transform into contempt? I tried to find the exact moment of rupture, but I realized there wasn't one moment. It had been 1,000 small moments accumulated. 1,000 times she chose him instead of me. 1,000 times she allowed him to disrespect me. 1,000 times her silence was as cruel as his screams. And now it had reached the point of total rupture, the point of no return. I turned on my side in bed and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day to start fighting back. Robert had promised to go with me to the police station early in the morning, help me file the formal report, guide me about my rights. For the first time in years, I wasn't facing my problems alone. I had someone by my side, someone who truly cared, someone who had the tools to make that injustice be corrected. I fell asleep with that strange feeling that, despite everything I had lost that night, maybe I had gained something too. The courage to no longer accept being treated as less than I deserved. And that courage, I knew, would make all the difference in what was coming. The doorbell rang too early. At least that's what my daughter and gold digger son-in-law must have thought when they heard that sound echoing through the house at 7 in the morning. I was at Martha's house at that moment, having coffee with hands still trembling, trying to eat a piece of toast that tasted like cardboard in my mouth. Robert had left early, saying only, "I'm going to handle this," with that determination I remembered him having in college when he decided to do something. Martha held my hand across the table and said, "Breathe, you did the right thing." But even knowing that, my stomach was churning with nervousness. This real story was taking a direction I never imagined, and part of me still couldn't believe it was really happening. Later I found out exactly what happened that morning. Robert told me every detail, and just imagining the scene, I felt a strange satisfaction mixed with nervousness. The doorbell rang, and my son-in-law must have grumbled something about who the hell was showing up so early. When he opened the door, he found Robert in his police uniform, accompanied by another officer. "Good morning. I'm Officer Robert Thompson. We're here to talk about an incident that occurred last night involving Margaret Anderson." I saw through my imagination's eyes my son-in-law's face losing its color. That arrogant confidence he always had, that certainty that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences, started cracking right there on the doorstep. "What are you talking about?" He tried to play innocent, but his voice failed at the end of the sentence. Robert wasn't the type to be fooled. "Can we come in? It would be better to talk inside." It wasn't really a request. It was a statement. My ungrateful daughter appeared behind her husband, still in her robe, hair messy. When she saw the police officers, her eyes widened. It must have been in that moment that she understood this was no longer a family matter that could be swept under the rug. It was official. It was serious. It was real. This emotional story was gaining chapters she never imagined writing. And from the villain of the story, she was now in the role of someone who would have to give explanations. They entered the living room, that same living room where I had been humiliated so many times, where I had felt invisible, where I had swallowed so much disrespect in silence. Robert told me he sat on the couch with all the calm in the world, took out a notepad, and started asking questions. Direct, objective questions, the kind that don't leave room for comfortable lies. Margaret Anderson was expelled from this residence last night. Is that correct? My son-in-law tried to minimize it. It was just an argument that got out of control. You know how family is. Robert interrupted him. So you confirm that she was forced to leave. The silence that followed must have been deafening. It was the difference between vague excuses and admitting a crime. And my son-in-law, for the first time, didn't have a ready answer. Did she contribute financially to this property? Robert continued, turning a page in the notepad. My daughter finally spoke, her voice coming out thin and nervous. A little, but yes or no. The authority in Robert's voice left no room for half-truths. Yes, she admitted, so quietly you could barely hear. Robert wrote everything down. Each hesitation, each attempt to deflect, each contradiction in their stories. It wasn't an interrogation in the police sense. It was a formal record of everything that had happened. And for the first time, that elderly mother who had been treated like nothing was being taken seriously. Her words were being documented. Her pain was being validated, and they were being held accountable. Do you understand that expelling someone who has rights to the property is illegal? Robert explained with professional patience, but there was a coldness in his tone. Especially when that person is elderly and vulnerable. This can constitute elder abuse, coercion, and illegal eviction. I saw in my mind the expression of panic on their faces. Elder abuse. Those words must have hit like a punch. Suddenly it wasn't about a family argument anymore. It was about crimes with legal names, with real consequences. The gold digger's son-in-law tried to argue, say it was a misunderstanding, that they didn't intend to hurt anyone. But the words sounded empty even to himself. Hard to claim misunderstanding when you screamed, "Get out of here, you old woman," in someone's face. Robert continued. Margaret has the right to recover her belongings from the residence at an agreed time, accompanied if necessary. She also has the right to seek legal compensation for emotional damages and illegal eviction. Each word was a bomb being detonated in that room. My daughter started crying, not tears of genuine remorse, but of fear. Fear of the consequences, fear of how this would affect their reputation, fear of losing the control they always had. And you know what's interesting? I didn't feel sorry. Not at all. After everything they did to me, after all the years being humiliated, those tears of hers didn't awaken any compassion in me. Just the feeling that finally, there was some justice happening. You'll be formally notified about the next steps, Robert informed, standing up. I strongly recommend you seek legal counsel, and if Margaret decides to proceed with full legal measures, you'll be contacted. He handed over a card with contact information. If there's any attempt at retaliation, harassment, or threats against Margaret, that will be treated as a separate and more serious crime. Is that clear? Both nodded, looking like two children being scolded. But children who were finally understanding that actions have consequences. That wasn't spectacular arrest or dramatic revenge. It was real consequence. It was the law doing its job. It was the moment they realized they had crossed a line they could no longer pretend didn't exist. When Robert told me all of this later that morning, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief, because finally, someone had defended me. Satisfaction, because they were being held accountable. But also sadness, a deep sadness that it had reached that point, that my own daughter had treated me so badly that police intervention was necessary. Martha served more coffee and sat next to us. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "It's like part of me is relieved, and part of me still doesn't believe all of this is happening." Robert placed his hand on my shoulder. "What you're feeling is normal, but you need to know what you did was brave and necessary." We spent the rest of the morning discussing the next steps. Robert explained that the police report was just the beginning. I would need to decide if I wanted to proceed with a civil lawsuit, if I wanted to seek a restraining order, if I wanted to negotiate about my rights in the property. There were so many decisions, so many options, that my head was spinning trying to process everything. "You don't need to decide everything today," he assured me. "Let's go step by step. The important thing is that now you're safe and you have options. You're no longer at their mercy." Those words meant more to me than he could imagine. After years feeling powerless, I finally had some power back. This ungrateful daughter and gold-digger son-in-law had thought they could discard me without consequences. They were learning they were very, very wrong. Robert's phone rang. It was the police station. He answered, listened for a moment, and then his eyes met mine. "They called the police station," he said after hanging up, wanting to clarify some misunderstandings. "They're nervous." A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Good. They should be." Martha shook her head. "They really thought they could kick you out like that and nothing would happen? What kind of people do that?" But I knew what kind of people. People who had lost their humanity along the way, who had forgotten that an elderly mother isn't disposable, who had convinced themselves that power and control were more important than love and respect. And now, for the first time, they were facing the fact that the world didn't work the way they thought. When fear appears, lies try to survive. And that's exactly what happened in the days following the police visit. My cell phone started receiving messages, first from my daughter, then even from the gold-digger son-in-law. Long messages, full of apologies that didn't seem sincere, trying to rewrite what had happened that night. "Mom, I think there was a misunderstanding," one of them said. "We were nervous, said things we didn't mean to say." Another message. "You know how it is when emotions are running high. We never intended to hurt you." I read those words and felt a cold anger growing inside me. Misunderstanding? Emotions running high? They really thought I was going to swallow that story after everything? Robert was sitting next to me in Martha's living room when I showed him the messages. He read carefully, jaw clenched. "This is classic," he commented. "When people realize they can face real consequences, they try to rewrite the narrative. They make it seem like it was all a big mistake, that you misunderstood." He returned my phone. "But we have the record. We have your original version of the facts, given just hours after the incident. We have the clear emotional scars. This real story can't be rewritten just because now it's convenient for them." Martha brought tea and sat with us. "What do you want to do, Margaret?" I looked at the phone, at those pathetic messages trying to erase the total humiliation they put me through. I want them to pay for what they did. In the following days, other things started surfacing. A neighbor of my daughter's called me, an elderly lady named Mrs. Patterson, whom I knew by sight. "Margaret, I needed to tell you something," she began, her voice hesitant. "I heard the screams that night. It wasn't the first time. It's been months that I hear things. Cruel comments, arguments where his voice is always loud and you seem to always be apologizing." My heart tightened. Other people had heard. Other people knew. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. "I should have," she admitted, with guilt in her voice. "But you know, we always think it's not our business. Now I'm feeling terrible. If you need someone to testify about what I heard, I will." Testimonies. The words sounded so formal, so serious, but it was exactly what Robert had said I would need if I wanted to take this forward. And apparently, I wasn't as alone as I thought. 2 more neighbors contacted me in the following days. One of them had seen my son-in-law treat me with contempt several times when I was in the garden. Another had heard arguments through the open windows in summer. "That man never treated you with respect," she said directly, "and your daughter just let it happen. We'd comment about it among ourselves, about how sad it was to see you being treated that way." Each testimony was a piece falling into place, building a picture very different from the one my ungrateful daughter and gold-digger son-in-law were trying to paint now. Robert documented everything meticulously. Names, dates, specific incidents the neighbors remembered. "This is gold," he told me, organizing the notes. "They're trying to make it look like it was an isolated incident, one bad night. But these testimonies show a pattern of behavior, systematic abuse, not a one-time misunderstanding." I watched him work, all that dedication, and wondered why he was doing all of this. Sure, we were old friends, but this went beyond friendship. There was something in the way he looked at me, how he genuinely cared, that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years, but I pushed those thoughts away. It wasn't the time for that. I had a battle to fight. My daughter's messages became more desperate. "Mom, please, can we talk? This is getting out of control." Another, "We don't need to involve lawyers in this. We can resolve it as family." And the most revealing of all, "You're destroying our reputation in the neighborhood. People are looking at us differently." Ah, so that's what it was about. Not about what they did to me. Not about truly apologizing. It was about how this was affecting them. How the perfect image they cultivated was cracking, revealing the rot underneath. This emotional story was unfolding in ways they never imagined, and the control they always had was slipping through their fingers like sand. The son-in-law tried a different approach. He called my cell phone. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. "Margaret, look, I know things got tense, but you have to understand the pressure we were under. The stress from work, the bills to pay, the kids. It's not easy having one more person in the house." I listened to the message with Robert by my side. When it ended, he shook his head in disgust. "Did you hear that? He's putting the blame on you. Having one more person in the house, as if you were a burden they generously carried. There's not a single word of real responsibility for the screaming, the threats, the expulsion." He was right. It was all manipulation, trying to rewrite the story to make them the overburdened heroes, and me the ungrateful villain. Martha found something interesting, too. She was friends with a woman in the church group who knew someone who worked with my daughter. "Apparently she's telling a very different version at work," Martha informed me, "saying you had a breakdown, that you left of your own accord, that they're worried about you." I felt anger boiling inside me. A breakdown? Own accord? They were really spreading lies, trying to make me look unstable, trying to reverse the roles of victim and aggressor. "This is defamation," Robert said immediately, "and we can add this to the list of offenses. The more they try to cover up, the worse it gets for them. It's like digging a deeper hole trying to get out of the first one." I even received a message from my son-in-law saying they were willing to forget everything if I came back and stopped with all this drama. Forget everything. As if years of humiliation could be erased with a simple, "let's forget this." As if I would forget the screams, the threats, the feeling of being discarded like trash, and the part about drama, turning my pursuit of justice and dignity into something frivolous, something exaggerated. It was so typical of them, so predictable that I almost had to laugh, almost, because there was nothing funny about how they kept trying to manipulate me even after everything. This elderly mother they thought they could control was no longer accepting their crumbs. Robert advised me not to respond to any of the messages. Let them talk. Each message, each attempt to rewrite history, each false excuse, all of this serves as evidence, shows the pattern of manipulative behavior, shows they're not really sorry, they're just afraid of the consequences. So I saved everything. Screenshots of each message, recordings of each call they left. I was building a file, a chronology of lies and manipulations, and the more they tried to justify themselves, the more they buried themselves. It was almost fascinating to watch the desperation grow, to see their narrative crumble while the truth remained solid and unshakable. There was a moment when my daughter tried to use the grandchildren as an emotional weapon. "The kids are asking about you. They miss you. Don't you want to see your grandchildren?" That broke me. Of course I wanted to see my grandchildren. Of course I missed them. But I wasn't going to let her use the love I felt for them as a manipulation tool. I wasn't going back to that toxic environment, to that abusive situation, just to have access to the children. Robert saw the tears in my eyes when I read that message. "She knows where to hit you," he said gently, "but you need to stand firm. If you go back now, nothing will change. It'll be the same cycle again." He was right. I knew he was right, but that didn't make the pain any less. The lawyer Robert recommended analyzed everything, the messages, the testimonies, the police records. "They're making my job easier," he commented with a cynical smile. "Each attempt to minimize, each lie told, each contradictory version, all of this strengthens your case. They're hanging themselves with their own rope." He explained we could sue for illegal eviction, emotional abuse, defamation, and possibly claim a larger portion of the house based on my financial contributions. "This won't be quick," he warned, "but if you're willing to go all the way, we have a very strong case." I looked at Robert and Martha, who were with me at that meeting. I looked at all the evidence spread across the table, and then I looked at the lawyer and said, "Let's go all the way. Some actions don't stay within four walls. no matter how much my ungrateful daughter and gold-digger son-in-law wanted to keep it as a family matter. Truth has a funny way of spreading. It started with the neighbors who testified, who told other friends, who told other people. Then it was the church group. Martha didn't spread gossip, but when they asked about me, she was honest about what had happened. And you know how a small community is. News flies. Within weeks, it seemed like half the city knew that an elderly mother had been kicked out of her home by her own daughter. And people had opinions, very clear opinions about the kind of people who do that to their own mother. I started hearing stories through Martha and Robert. How my daughter wasn't greeted the same way at the supermarket anymore. How the son-in-law noticed the looks when he entered the local cafe. How people who used to treat them with cordiality now just waved briefly and moved on. It wasn't complete ostracism. It wasn't like the entire city had turned against them. But it was something. It was the silent weight of social judgment. That feeling that everyone knows what you did and doesn't approve. This real story had left those four walls and was now being discussed at dinner tables, in bank lines, in hallway conversations, and they hated every second of it. The respect they valued so much started disappearing like smoke. My son-in-law worked in sales, depended on his reputation, on appearing trustworthy and upright. But how do you trust a man who kicks out his elderly mother-in-law? One of his clients, who was also a member of our church group, canceled a contract, didn't give detailed explanations, just said he preferred to do business elsewhere. My daughter, who always took pride in her position in the community, in being seen as a good person, started noticing doors closing subtly, invitations that didn't come anymore, conversations that cooled when she approached. It wasn't dramatic. It was just consequences, real social consequences for real actions. The legal part was advancing too. The lawyer had filed a formal action demanding compensation for my financial contributions to the house, plus emotional damages for illegal eviction and psychological abuse. Robert kept me informed of each step, explaining each legal document I needed to sign, each hearing we'd have ahead. The justice system is slow, he warned me more than once, but it's working. Each piece is falling into place. And it really was. Their lawyers tried to argue that my contributions were gifts, but I had receipts, bank transfers marked as contribution to the house. I had emails where we discussed renovations I helped pay for. I had everything documented. This emotional story was proving that keeping papers mattered. There was a preliminary hearing in court, nothing big, just initial procedures, but seeing my daughter and son-in-law sitting across the room with their lawyers was surreal. They didn't even look in my direction. They kept their eyes down, looking small and uncomfortable in their formal suits. The judge read the documents, asked some questions, established dates. It was all very bureaucratic, very cold. But when we left, I saw something in their expression I had never seen before. Real fear. Not fear of me, but fear of the system. Fear of the consequences that were starting to materialize. That elderly mother they had discarded was now sitting across from them in a courtroom, and they were having to answer for their actions. Martha told me that a friend of hers mother had commented, "I would never let someone treat my mother that way." What kind of daughter does that? The question echoed. What kind of daughter does that? It was the question everyone was asking themselves, and my daughter knew it. She tried to do damage control, posting old photos on social media, photos of the two of us in happier times, with captions about mother's love and precious memories. But people aren't fools. They saw through the performance, understood it was just a desperate attempt to repair a damaged image. The comments were polite but cold. Nobody was buying that revised narrative she was trying to sell. The gold-digger son-in-law tried a different approach. He started going to church again, something he hadn't done in years. He'd sit in the front rows, sing loudly, wave to everyone. But people in our community had memory. They remembered the Sundays he stayed home while my daughter took the children alone. They remembered the sarcastic comments he made about religious people. And now, suddenly, he was devout? Please, even the pastor, a kind man named Pastor John, sought me out to ask how I was doing. "I'm praying for your whole family," he said sincerely, "but especially for you, Margaret. What they did wasn't right." His support meant more than I expected. It wasn't just me saying it was wrong. The community itself was validating my pain. Robert explained that beyond the civil lawsuit, there was the possibility of criminal charges for elder abuse. "It's a fine line," he said. It depends on how the prosecutor interprets the situation. But with the testimonies, the recordings of the threatening calls, the messages, there's enough material for at least an investigation. Prosecutor, criminal charges. The words sounded so grave, so definitive. Part of me wondered if I was going too far. But then I remembered the screams, the threats, the feeling of being discarded like trash. I remembered the nights I cried alone in my room in that house, feeling less than human, and the doubt disappeared. I wasn't going too far. I was just seeking what was fair. Things got so uncomfortable for them in the neighborhood that I heard they were considering moving. "They can't live here anymore," one of the neighbors commented to Martha. "Too much judgment, too many people knowing what they did." And you know what I thought when I heard that? That maybe now they understood a little of how I felt, not being welcome, feeling all the stares, wanting to disappear. The difference was that I hadn't done anything to deserve that treatment. They, on the other hand, had dug their own hole. This ungrateful daughter who cared so much about appearances was now living the nightmare of having her true nature exposed for everyone to see. The lawsuit revealed more things, too. During evidence collection, we discovered they had tried to remove my name from some house documents without my authorization. They tried to make it seem like I had never contributed financially. But banks keep records. The truth was there, in black and white, impossible to erase. Their lawyer was visibly uncomfortable when this came to light. "This doesn't help your case," he told them in one of the preliminary meetings that Robert told me about later. It was document fraud, falsification, an attempt to deceive me even more. Each new revelation only proved they were willing to do anything to avoid responsibility. The messages kept coming, but now they had a different tone. Less arrogance, more desperation. "Mom, please, this has already gone too far. Can we resolve this without lawyers?" Too far? Too far? Where was that concern when they kicked me out? Where was that willingness to resolve when they were screaming and threatening me? I didn't respond. I let the silence speak for me. I let the legal process follow its course. Because some things can't be resolved with a conversation after the line has been crossed so completely. Some wounds are too deep to heal with empty apologies. And some people need to face the complete consequences of their actions before any kind of reconciliation is possible. If it ever would be possible, the law was doing its part, society was doing its part. And me? I was finally, for the first time in years, doing my part, defending myself, demanding respect, refusing to be treated as disposable. And there was still the final blow, something they didn't know was coming, something that would completely change the balance of power. And when it came, they would understand they had completely underestimated that elderly mother they thought they could trample without consequences. The storm they had started was just gaining strength, and the worst was yet to come. What they called our house was never just theirs. This truth came to light so clearly, so indisputably, that even their lawyer was speechless at the meeting. We were all sitting in that cold conference room. Me, my lawyer, Robert by my side for moral support, and across the long table, my ungrateful daughter, the gold digger son-in-law, and their two lawyers in expensive suits. On the table, piles of documents, receipts, bank statements, emails, contracts, each paper irrefutable proof that I wasn't there as a favor, like they tried to make it seem. I had rights, legal rights, documented, impossible to deny. And when my lawyer started presenting each piece of evidence, I saw the color draining from their faces gradually. "Margaret contributed 40% of the down payment for the house," my lawyer began, placing the first document on the table. "Here's the bank transfer, dated March 2019, in the amount of $80,000. He slid the paper toward them. My son-in-law picked up the document, looked at it as if it were a bomb about to explode. He couldn't deny it. It was all there, black and white. "Additionally," my lawyer continued, "Margaret completely financed the kitchen renovation in 2020, $35,000, more documents on the table, and contributed monthly with $1,000 for house expenses for the last 3 years. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "This totals approximately $151,000 in direct and verifiable contributions." The silence in the room was so dense you could feel its weight. My daughter was looking at her hands, unable to raise her eyes. The gold digger son-in-law was trying to maintain a neutral expression, but I could see his jaw clenched, fingers drumming nervously on the table. His main lawyer, a middle-aged man with glasses that slid down his nose, flipped through the documents and then looked at his clients with an expression that clearly said, "Why didn't you tell me this?" This real story was unfolding exactly as my lawyer had predicted. They had built their defense on the lie that I was just a guest, a mother they took in out of kindness. But the truth was destroying that narrative word by word, number by number. In addition to the financial contributions, my lawyer proceeded, we have emails and text messages where Margaret and her daughter discuss the house as shared property. Here, he pointed to another document, we have an email from June 2020 where Sarah writes, and I quote, "Our house is looking beautiful with the new kitchen, Mom. Thank you for investing in this with us." Our house. Investing. Her words, not mine. I saw my daughter close her eyes. She remembered that email. Of course she remembered. Back then, when they still needed my money, I was part of the family. It was our house. Now that they wanted to get rid of me, suddenly it was theirs, and I had no right to anything. The hypocrisy was so exposed that even I, who had lived through all of it, felt surprised at how shameless the narrative change was. Their lawyer tried to regain control. Well, even with the contributions, the property name is only in Sarah and Michael's names. Technically, my lawyer interrupted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Technically, when someone contributes substantially to a property with the implicit or explicit promise of permanent housing, what we call a constructive trust is established, especially when there's documentation showing the person was led to believe they had rights to the property. He pulled out another document. Here we have a text message from Sarah to Margaret in August 2019. "This is your home too, Mom. It always will be." This establishes reasonable expectation of permanent residence. Checkmate. I saw it written on their lawyer's face. They had no way out. Michael, my gold digger son-in-law, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. She's turning the family against us because of money." His lawyer placed his hand on his arm, trying to calm him, but he pulled away. "We took her in when she had nowhere to go, and now she wants to take our house?" My lawyer remained calm, professional. "Nobody is taking anything, Mr. Peterson. We're simply establishing that Margaret has legal right to part of the property based on her substantial contributions, something you deliberately tried to hide." That accusation hung in the air. Tried to hide. Tried to erase my participation, make me look like an ungrateful guest, when in reality I had helped buy that house. This total humiliation of being financially erased was being corrected right there in that cold conference room. Robert, who had remained silent until then, leaned over and whispered in my ear, "You're doing well. Breathe." I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath. Seeing all of that exposed, seeing years of contributions and sacrifices being validated, was overwhelming. It wasn't about the money. It never was about the money. It was about being recognized, about having my reality confirmed after so long being treated as if my memories were false, as if my contributions didn't exist. It was about dignity. It was about truth. And the truth was, finally being spoken out loud to people who had the power to do something about it. My lawyer continued, "Furthermore, we have the issue of illegal eviction of an elderly person who contributed to the property and had reasonable expectation of permanent residence. This constitutes not just a civil matter, but potentially criminal under elder protection laws." He looked directly at Michael and Sarah. "You didn't just kick out a mother. You kicked out a co-investor, a person with documented legal rights, and you did it violently, with threats, causing substantial emotional trauma to a vulnerable person." Each word was a hammer falling. Michael looked like he was going to explode again. Sarah was crying silently, but they weren't tears of genuine remorse. They were tears of someone realizing they had completely lost control of the situation. "So, what do you want?" their main lawyer finally asked, defeated. My lawyer looked at me, giving me the floor. I took a deep breath. "I want fair compensation for my share in the property," I began, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. "I want formal recognition of my contributions. I want compensation for emotional damages, and I want guarantee that I'll never be treated that way again." I looked directly at my daughter. "You raised me to be strong, to not accept being disrespected. And now I'm using exactly the lessons I taught you." I saw something break in her eyes in that moment. Maybe the first real crack in the armor she had built. This ungrateful daughter was beginning to understand what she had done. Or at least, she was beginning to understand she'd have to pay for it. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. Numbers were discussed, options were presented, timelines were established. In the end, it became clear they'd have 2 choices: negotiate a fair agreement with me, compensating me adequately and formally recognizing my rights, or go to court and risk a public trial that would completely destroy whatever reputation they still had. "We'll talk with our clients and return with a proposal," their lawyer said, gathering the papers with a tired expression. He knew he didn't have a case. He knew I had all the cards in hand. And more importantly, they now knew it too. When we left that room, Robert hugged me. "You were amazing in there," he said, pride clear in his voice, firm, clear, unwavering. Martha was waiting in the hallway and came running when she saw us. "So?" My lawyer smiled, a genuine smile this time. "They have no way to win. The documents are too solid. They're going to have to negotiate." I felt something strange inside me. It wasn't exactly happiness. How can you be completely happy when you're suing your own daughter? But it was satisfaction. It was justice. It was the feeling that finally, after so long being trampled, I was standing up again. That house they said was only theirs? It never was. And now everyone knew it. This elderly mother they thought they could discard had proven she was worth much more than they ever acknowledged. And then, the game completely turned. The control they had, the power they exercised over me for so long, slipped through their fingers like water. They were no longer the ones deciding my fate. I was. With the law on my side, with irrefutable evidence, with rights that couldn't be denied, the balance of power had completely changed. And when we left that building into the afternoon sun, I felt for the first time in years that my life was in my own hands again. But there was still one more turn in this story, a turn that none of us expected. And that would change everything once more. Nothing hurts more than being forced to answer for your own actions. And that's exactly what happened in the weeks following that explosive meeting. The settlement proposal arrived a week later, reluctant, full of clauses trying to minimize their responsibility. But it was there. They offered financial compensation for my share in the house, plus an additional amount for emotional damages. They put it in quotes, as if they weren't real. My lawyer read the proposal and shook his head. "They're offering 60% of what you deserve. We can refuse and go to trial, or we can counter-propose." I looked at Robert, who was sitting next to me as always. "What do you think?" He thought for a moment. "I think they'll increase the offer if you push. They don't want to go to court. It would be public, humiliating for them." Robert was right. When my lawyer sent our counter-proposal, 85% of the fair market value of my share, plus full compensation for emotional damages, without quotes and without minimizations, they accepted in 3 days. 3 days. After months making me feel I was worthless, suddenly, they were willing to pay a substantial amount just to resolve it quickly. The irony wasn't lost on me. This real story was having a twist I never imagined living. That elderly mother who was kicked out with just a suitcase was about to receive not just financial compensation, but formal recognition that she had been wronged. It wasn't complete victory. Complete victory would have been never having to go through that. But it was justice. And sometimes, justice is as close to victory as we get. The signing of the agreement was scheduled for a Thursday morning. We arrived at the lawyer's office, me, Robert, and Martha, for support. They were already there when we entered. My daughter was unrecognizable. Swollen eyes, wrinkled clothes, as if she hadn't been sleeping well for weeks. The gold digger son-in-law looked smaller somehow, as if he had shrunk, without that arrogance, without that aggressive posture. Just 2 defeated adults about to sign papers that admitted how much they had wronged. When our eyes met, my daughter opened her mouth as if to say something, but no sound came out. What would she say? Sorry? After everything? Words seemed too small, too insignificant to cover the abyss between us. Whoever screamed at me had to explain each word, each action. The agreement included a section where they had to formally recognize in writing each financial contribution I made. They had to confirm the eviction was illegal and unjustified. They had to admit they caused substantial emotional damage. There was no spectacular arrest, no dramatic scenes of instant justice, but there was real consequence. Real and documented. They signed each page, and each signature was an admission that I was right, that they were wrong, that ungrateful daughter and gold-digger son-in-law had crossed lines they should never have crossed. Their pen seemed to weigh tons each time it touched the paper. Besides the financial compensation, the agreement established clear boundaries. If they wanted to have any contact with me from then on, it would have to be respectful, with advance notice, without showing up uninvited. There were clauses about access to the grandchildren. I'd have the right to see them, but in a neutral environment, with established schedules, ensuring nobody would use the children as an emotional weapon again. It was all so cold, so legal, so different from how family should be. But real family doesn't kick out an elderly mother. Real family doesn't scream, "Get out of here, you old woman," and slam the door in the face of the person who raised you. So there we were, transforming blood relations into legal contracts because they had destroyed any possibility of trust. When everything was signed, their lawyer quickly gathered the papers and practically pushed his clients out of the room. But before leaving, my daughter stopped at the door. She turned to me, tears running down her face. "Mom, she began, her voice breaking. I waited. Part of me still wanted to hear a genuine apology, an explanation, something that would make it all make sense. But she just shook her head and left. She couldn't even finish the sentence. And you know what? Maybe it was better that way, because anything she said in that moment wouldn't change what had happened, wouldn't erase the screams, the humiliations, the night I was thrown on the street. This emotional story of family betrayal wouldn't have a magical reconciliation moment, at least not now. Robert touched my shoulder gently. "How are you?" I looked at the signed documents on the table. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like I should be happy, relieved, and I am, in part. But I'm also sad that it came to this." Martha came from the other side and hugged me. "You did what you needed to do. You defended yourself. That's courage, not cruelty." She was right. I knew she was, but it still hurt. It hurt in a deep and ancient way, a pain of loss that no amount of money could heal. I had lost my daughter. Not physically, she was still alive, still existed, but the relationship we had had died that night when they kicked me out, and no legal agreement could resurrect it. We went out to the parking lot, and that's when Robert stopped and turned to me. There was something different in his expression, something nervous, almost vulnerable. "Margaret, there's something I need to tell you," he began. Martha, noticing the moment, mumbled something about needing to make a call and discreetly walked away. We stood there, just the two of us, the afternoon sun creating long shadows on the asphalt. "What?" I asked, confused by the sudden change of mood. He took a deep breath, like someone about to jump off a cliff. "When we reunited that night, when you arrived at Martha's house, it wasn't just surprise I felt, it was something more. Something I thought I had buried a long time ago." My heart started beating faster. "Robert, what are you saying?" He took a step closer, eyes fixed on mine. "In college, I was in love with you, completely in love. I'd spend those hours in the library studying with you, and could only think about how to tell you. But I was shy, insecure, afraid of ruining our friendship." He smiled sadly. "And then you met your husband. I saw you fall in love with him, saw you get married, and I kept my feelings to myself. I thought with time they'd disappear. I got married too, tried to move on, but the marriage didn't work out. And during all that time, Margaret, I never stopped loving you. Never really stopped." The world seemed to stop for a second. Robert, my friend from college, the man who had been by my side throughout this ordeal, who had fought for me, who had treated me with more respect and care in weeks than my own family had treated me in years. He loved me, had loved me all this time. "I'm not saying this to pressure you," he continued quickly, interpreting my silence as discomfort. "You just got out of a traumatic situation. You're processing so much. I just couldn't keep pretending my feelings were just friendship. You deserve honesty. You deserve to know that there's someone who sees you, who values you, who would never treat you the way they treated you." I felt tears in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were of something different. Surprise, maybe. Hope. For so long I had felt unwanted, disposable, as if my time of being loved had passed. And there was a good man, a decent man, telling me I was seen, that I was valuable, that I was loved. I didn't say anything immediately. I just took a step forward and hugged him. He hugged me back, strong but gentle, and we stood there for a moment that seemed suspended in time. "Thank you," I whispered against his shoulder, "for everything." for defending me, for being here, for seeing me. When we separated, he had tears in his eyes too. "You don't need to answer now," he said, quickly wiping his eyes. "You don't need to answer ever if you don't want to. I just needed you to know." I held his hands between mine. "Robert, I need time. I need to process everything that happened. I need to find myself again. I spent so much time being defined by others, as a mother, as a mother-in-law, as a victim. I need to discover who I am now, alone." He nodded, understanding clear in his eyes. "I understand, and I'll be here no matter what you decide. As a friend, if that's all you want. As something more, if one day you're ready." That declaration, that patience, that respect, it was everything I didn't know I needed to hear. Martha came back a few minutes later, pretending not to notice we both had tears on our faces. "Everything okay?" she asked in that motherly way of hers. "Everything's okay," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, it was true. It really was okay. It wasn't perfect. My relationship with my daughter was destroyed. I had emotional scars that would take years to heal, and I had a long road ahead. But it was okay, because I had defended myself. I had demanded justice and gotten it. I had people who supported me, who saw me, who cared. And I had, surprisingly, the possibility of love on the horizon. Not now, not immediately, but someday, maybe. And I recovered something I had lost. It wasn't the money, although the financial compensation meant security and independence. It wasn't the legal victory, although it validated my pain and my truth. What I recovered was my voice, my dignity, my sense that I mattered, that my life had value, that it wasn't acceptable to be treated like trash. They might have temporarily taken my roof, might have tried to take my peace, but they couldn't take who I was deep down. That elderly mother they thought was weak and resourceless proved to be stronger than anyone imagined. And that strength, I discovered, had been there all along. It just needed to be reminded it existed. I survived the day they tried to erase me. That phrase echoed in my head as I moved into my new apartment. Small, but mine. Totally mine. Bought with the compensation from the settlement. Decorated the way I wanted, without having to ask permission or hear cruel comments about my choices. Martha and Robert helped me move on a sunny Saturday in spring. We carried boxes, assembled furniture, laughed at silly jokes while trying to figure out where everything went. It was simple, it was ordinary, it was perfect. For the first time in years, I felt I had a real home. Not just a roof over my head, but a place where I belonged, where each object reflected who I was. This real story had finally reached a chapter of peace. The months passed like pages turning. I established a routine, morning walks in the park, painting classes I always wanted to take but never had time for, afternoons having coffee with Martha and friends from church. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with, made new friends in the building. There was a lightness in my life that I hadn't experienced in so long I had almost forgotten what it was like. I no longer woke up with that tightness in my chest, with fear of walking on eggshells, with the constant feeling of being under judgment. I woke up and simply lived. And living, I discovered, was good. It was really good. That total humiliation I had suffered seemed increasingly distant, like a storm that had passed, leaving clear skies behind. Robert continued being a constant presence in my life. We had coffee together twice a week, without pressure, without expectations. Just conversations about everything and nothing, about books we were reading, movies we watched, memories from college, dreams for the future. He never mentioned his declaration of love again, never pressured. He was just there, constant like the sun rising every day. And gradually, without realizing exactly when it started, I found myself eagerly anticipating our meetings, smiling when I saw a message from him, saving funny stories to tell when we'd meet. There was something growing between us, slow but steady, like a plant finding its way through concrete. This emotional story was gaining a chapter I never imagined writing. There was a day, about 6 months after I moved, when I realized something. I was preparing dinner, music playing on the radio, dancing alone in the kitchen while cutting vegetables, and suddenly it hit me. I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy. It wasn't a loud or dramatic happiness. It was quiet, constant, like a calm river flowing. I stopped what I was doing and just felt that moment. After everything I had been through, after the tears and trauma and pain, there I was, an elderly mother dancing alone in her own kitchen, happy. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd get here, I wouldn't have believed it. But life has a funny way of surprising you. As for my daughter and gold-digger son-in-law, I heard through mutual acquaintances that they had moved to another city. A new beginning, supposedly. Away from the judgmental stares, away from the community that knew what they had done. Part of me felt sadness about that. Not for them, but for the whole situation. For the children who would grow up knowing Grandma wasn't around because of choices their parents made. For the mother-daughter relationship that had been destroyed, perhaps irreparably. But it wasn't my responsibility to fix that. I had offered love, offered respect, offered everything a mother offers, and I had been discarded. They would have to live with that choice. This ungrateful daughter would have to explain to her own children one day why Grandma wasn't in their lives, and that explanation, I knew, would be difficult. Robert took me to dinner one autumn evening. Nothing extravagant, just a cozy Italian restaurant with candles on the tables and soft music playing. During dinner, we talked and laughed like we always did, but there was something different in the air, a good tension, an anticipation. When we finished eating and were just sitting drinking wine, he took my hand across the table. "Margaret, I know I said I'd give you time, and I did, but I need to ask, is there any chance for us?" I looked at that good man, that man who had treated me with more kindness and respect than I had experienced in years, who had fought for me when no one else fought, who had seen me when I felt invisible. "Robert," I began, and I saw nervousness pass through his eyes. "I spent a lot of my life putting everyone before me. My husband, my daughter, even that gold-digger son-in-law who treated me like trash. I lost who I was in the process of being what everyone needed me to be." He nodded, listening attentively. "These last months, living alone, making my own choices, discovering myself again, they were fundamental. I needed them. I needed to prove to myself I could be okay alone before I could be with someone again." I paused, squeezing his hand. "But now I'm ready. Ready to give whatever this is between us a chance. Ready to see where this can go." The smile that spread across his face lit up the entire room. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no dramatic music playing or fireworks. It was just two middle-aged adults, both with scars and stories, deciding to try building something together. But you know what? That was better than any fairy tale, because it was real. It was honest. It was based on mutual respect, on genuine companionship, on having gone through the storm together and come out the other side. Robert paid the bill, and we went out hand in hand into the cool night. "Thank you for waiting," I said. "Thank you for being here." He kissed my forehead gently. "Always, I'll always be here." And I believed him, because he had proven it repeatedly. Today, a year after everything that happened, I'm at peace, truly at peace. It's not that I forgot what I went through. Those scars are with me and always will be. But they don't define me anymore. I'm not just the elderly mother who was kicked out of her home. I'm Margaret. I'm a woman who loves painting landscapes, who makes the best chocolate cake in the church group, who's learning Italian because I always wanted to visit Rome. I'm someone who has a second chance at love, who has friends who care, who has her own space in the world. I'm a survivor. And surviving isn't just continuing to breathe. It's finding joy again. It's building a life worth living. And that's what I'm doing. Justice doesn't give back what I lived through. Doesn't erase the nights I cried alone. The screams that still echo sometimes in my nightmares. The pain of being rejected by my own daughter. But it guaranteed I'd never go through that again. It guaranteed I have resources to live independently. It guaranteed that those who hurt me understood there were consequences for their actions. And perhaps most importantly, it guaranteed I recovered my sense of self-worth. I'm not disposable. I'm not a burden. I'm a human being, with dignity, with rights, with intrinsic value that no one can take away. That lesson, hard as it was to learn, changed who I am. My daughter and son-in-law moved on with the marks of their own choices. I heard their marriage is tense, that the move to another city didn't solve problems like they hoped. I don't feel satisfaction about that. I don't wish them harm, despite everything. But I also don't feel responsible for fixing their lives. They made their choices. They chose cruelty over compassion. They chose pride over humility. They chose to kick me out instead of embrace me. And now they live with the consequences of those choices. Me? I chose to defend myself. I chose dignity. I chose justice. And I'm living with the consequences of that choice, and those consequences are good. They're the life I always deserved to have. I moved forward with dignity, autonomy, and the certainty that no one has the right to expel an entire life with a scream. That certainty carries me every day. When I wake up in my cozy apartment, when I have coffee with Robert and he looks at me as if I'm precious, when Martha calls me just to talk, when I paint a landscape and realize I'm creating something beautiful. In all these moments, I remember I survived. More than that, I remember I flourished. Like a flower growing through broken concrete, I found my way to the light, and no one, ever again, will make me forget I deserve to be in that light. That's my truth, that's my victory, and that's my peace. In the end, I discovered that justice isn't about revenge. It's about recovering your voice. It's about looking in the mirror and recognizing the person you see. It's about building a life where you don't need to apologize for existing. My story isn't just about being kicked out of home. It's about finding the way back to myself. And if there's anything I learned from all of this, it's that it's never too late to defend yourself. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. And never, never is it too late to start over. And you? Have you gone through something similar? Have you ever had to defend yourself from people who were supposed to love you? What would you do if you were in Margaret's place? Tell me here in the comments, because each story matters, each voice deserves to be heard. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Sometimes, we need to hear someone else's story to understand our own journey. And I'm here to share these stories with you always. So, until the next story.